Pre-registered coordinates. Drone surveillance. No escape route. This wasn't a battle. This was an execution. 3 vehicles. 11 men. One of Russia's most expensive mobile weapons systems. They drove through the pre-dawn darkness with the quiet confidence of soldiers who believed the sky above them was safe. The Iskander-M transporter erector launcher. A machine that costs more than most nations spend on their entire defense budgets in a year, rolled toward a pre-selected firing point in the forests north of Belgorod. The crew had done this dozens of times. Park. Erect. Fire. Withdraw. A practiced ritual that had delivered death across Ukrainian cities for years. They never saw the drone. They never saw the second one either. And when the first HIMARS rocket arrived, a precision-guided M31 munition traveling at nearly 1 kilometer per second. The crew of that launcher had approximately 0 seconds to realize the intelligence operation tracking them had been running for 16 hours straight. This is the story of how Ukrainian intelligence operators, drone crews, and rocket artillery teams took apart one of Russia's most prized strike assets in a single coordinated ambush. It is the story of patience. 16 hours of watching, waiting, letting the target settle into position. And it is the story of what happens when modern ISR capabilities meet a mobile ballistic missile system that thought it had escaped detection. Stay with me through every beat of this operation, because the details matter. The tactics here are being studied right now in war colleges on 3 continents. I'm your host at East Alert, where we analyze the battles that change wars. And this one changed how both sides think about mobile launcher survivability in the modern battle space. Let's go back to the beginning. The Iskander-M, NATO designation SS-26 Stone, is not simply a missile launcher. It is the centerpiece of Russian battlefield strategy in Ukraine. A single Iskander-M TEL, the transporter erector launcher, can carry 29 M723 quasi-ballistic missiles. Each missile has a range of approximately 500 kilometers. Each warhead weighs 480 kilograms. The system can fire both missiles in under 16 minutes and relocate before most air defense systems can track its launch signature. Russia fields these launchers in brigade-sized formations attached to combined arms armies. They are, in the language of military planners, high-value targets. When you destroy one, you don't just destroy a vehicle. You destroy Russia's ability to reach deep into Ukrainian territory on that axis for weeks. The system's mobility is its primary defense. A launcher that never stays in one place long enough to be targeted cannot be destroyed. This is the foundational logic of Russia's Iskander employment doctrine. Move. Fire. Move again. Keep the transporter erector launcher on the road as much as possible. Minimize time at the firing point. Get out before counter-battery radar can build a targeting solution. Ukrainian intelligence had been studying this doctrine for over 2 years by the time of this operation. They understood its rhythms, its patterns, its vulnerabilities. And in the weeks leading into this operation, they had identified something critical. A particular convoy, operating out of a staging area in the Belgorod region, had developed a habit. Which weapon do you think was most decisive in this operation? Was it A, the HIMARS rocket artillery, B, the surveillance drones tracking the convoy, or C, the intelligence network that identified the pattern in the first place? Think about it. We'll come back to this. The habit was subtle, almost invisible to anyone not looking for it specifically. The convoy, consisting of the Iskander-M TEL itself, a command vehicle, and a logistics truck carrying support equipment, had been cycling through a limited rotation of pre-surveyed firing points. Not because the crews were lazy, because the firing points themselves were pre-engineered. Each one had been prepared in advance by Russian engineering units. Cleared sight lines, calculated coordinates for specific target sets in Ukraine, hardened access roads capable of supporting the 47-ton launch vehicle without creating the kind of deep track marks that give away a vehicle's position to satellite reconnaissance. These pre-prepared positions are a Russian military engineering concept borrowed from Soviet-era nuclear doctrine. The logic is sound. If you know in advance where you need to fire from, and you have those positions surveyed and prepared, you reduce the time your high-value system spends stationary. Stationary is vulnerable. Mobile is safe. The problem is that prepared positions leave traces. Ukrainian signals intelligence, working with imagery analysts reviewing satellite data, had identified 3 of these firing points over approximately 6 weeks. Not by watching the Iskander-M TEL itself. The Russians varied their routes and timing carefully enough, but by identifying the engineering activity that preceded each position's activation. The cleared vegetation. The access roads. The power line routing adjustments that suggested a position capable of supporting communications equipment. The slight soil disturbance patterns visible in synthetic aperture radar imagery showing a surface had been graded and compacted. 3 positions, 1 convoy. 16 hours of patience waiting to see which one they'd choose. The intelligence picture Ukrainian operators were working from the night of this operation had been built over weeks of collection. Ground-based informants in the Belgorod region. Ukrainian intelligence assets whose courage is difficult to overstate, operating inside Russian-controlled territory with the knowledge that discovery meant execution, had provided initial indicators of the convoy's departure from its staging area. A phone call, a vehicle description, a direction of travel. That initial tip flowed into a collection architecture that Ukrainian GUR, military intelligence, had spent years developing with Western intelligence services. The tip was cross-referenced against signals intelligence, suggesting an uptick in encrypted communications on frequencies associated with Russian missile units in the region. It was compared against recent satellite imagery showing one of the 3 identified firing positions had been accessed. Fresh track marks on the access road, visible even in low-light imagery thanks to differential moisture content in the soil. The picture assembled in minutes. This convoy was heading to firing position 2. Stay with me. What happens in the next 18 minutes destroys one of Russia's most expensive weapon systems and sends shockwaves through the entire Russian missile force command structure. There was a problem. Firing position 2 sat in a forested depression approximately 4 kilometers from the nearest paved road. The access track was single lane, flanked on both sides by mature pine trees that limited visibility from above. A drone orbiting at altitude would struggle to maintain visual contact with vehicles moving through the tree canopy. The position itself, once vehicles entered it, would be partially obscured by the same tree cover that made it attractive to Russian planners. This was obstacle number 1. Ukrainian drone operators needed eyes on the target at the moment of strike. Not before. Not after. At the moment. A precision strike on a mobile system required confirmation that the system was actually at the designated coordinates at the time of impact. Fire too early and the convoy is still on the access track. You might destroy a truck, but you almost certainly miss the TL. Fire too late and the crew has launched their missiles and relocated. The solution came from Ukrainian drone units that had developed what they called a layered observation architecture during months of operational experience leading up to this strike. 2 FPV reconnaissance drones, modified commercial quadcopters with enhanced battery capacity and low-light camera systems, were positioned in a relay configuration along the access track. The first drone, orbiting at 300 meters above the tree line approximately 2 kilometers from the position, tracked the convoy as it moved along the access road. When the convoy moved beneath the tree canopy where the first drone lost visual, it handed off tracking data to the second drone, pre-positioned closer to the firing point itself, using the thermal signature of the vehicles to maintain tracking through intermittent gaps in the tree cover. The relay worked. At 3:17 a.m., the lead vehicle, the command truck, entered the firing position clearing. At 3:23 a.m., the Iskander-M TEL followed. At 3:31 a.m., the logistics vehicle completed the convoy's entry into position. The first microfinal of this operation had just resolved. The convoy was where Ukrainian intelligence said it would be. But now came the hardest part, the waiting. Because the plan was not to strike the convoy on arrival. The plan was to wait. A destroyed vehicle on an access road is a damaged asset. It can be recovered, equipment salvaged, crew extracted. A destroyed Iskander-M TEL with its missiles, the warheads, the guidance systems, the classified electronic components, is a catastrophic loss. But more than that, a destroyed launcher caught in the act of erecting its launch tube sends a message that no intelligence assessment can replicate. It tells every other Russian crew operating these systems that the sky is watching. That the moment they pull into a firing point, the clock is running. That there is no safe position. Ukrainian commanders made the call. Wait for erection. The Iskander-M crew went through their pre-fire sequence. The TEL's hydraulic erector system raised the launch canister to firing position, a process that takes approximately 16 minutes for a practiced crew. Satellite imagery captured the sequence. Drone operators confirmed visually through gaps in the tree cover. The launch tube elevated toward the Ukrainian sky that the crew assumed they owned for the next few minutes. How many vehicles did Ukraine ultimately destroy or put out of action in this strike? Was it A, 2, B, 3, or C, all vehicles plus the warheads? Hold that answer. We'll confirm it at the end. At 3:47 a.m., the targeting solution was transmitted from the Ukrainian forward coordination element to the HIMARS battery, holding at a pre-surveyed launch site approximately 62 kilometers to the southwest. The M142 HIMARS, High Mobility Artillery Rocket System, is a truck-mounted rocket artillery system that has fundamentally changed the mathematics of this war. Each launcher carries a pod of 6 M31 unitary rockets. The M31 has a range of approximately 70 kilometers in its standard configuration, with accuracy measured in meters rather than the hundreds of meters typical of older rocket artillery. The rocket uses a GPS-aided inertial navigation system to guide itself to a pre-programmed grid coordinate, adjusting in flight to compensate for wind and atmospheric variance. The HIMARS battery that received the targeting solution at 3:47 a.m. had been in position since 11:30 p.m. the previous evening. The crew had slept in shifts. The launcher was maintained in a warm configuration. Generator running, systems powered, firing solution software active. When the mission order arrived, the time from receipt to first launch was 4 minutes and 30 seconds. The first two M31 rockets left the launcher at 3:51 a.m. and 3:52 a.m. Subscribe to East Alert if you want to understand how modern warfare actually works, because what happens in the next 3 minutes is a masterclass in precision strike integration. At a velocity of approximately 1,600 meters per second during terminal approach, the rockets covered the 62-kilometer distance in just under 90 seconds. At 3:53 a.m., the first round impacted at coordinates centered on the Iskander-M TEL's erector assembly. Specifically, the junction between the launch tube and the erector arm, where internal guidance and hydraulic systems created a concentration of fragile, mission-critical components. The second round, following approximately 4 seconds behind, impacted the clearing's center mass, the area occupied by the command vehicle. 2 additional rounds followed at 3:54 a.m., targeted at the access track entry point and the area where the logistics vehicle had positioned itself at the clearing's edge. The drone operators watching through their camera feeds described what they saw in terms that have since appeared in military training programs across NATO. The first impact produced a pressure wave visible through the thermal imaging system. Not just heat, but a shock wave that moved through the forest floor like a ripple across water. The Iskander-M TEL, 47 tons of Russian precision manufacturing representing approximately $100 million in defense investment, stopped being a functional weapon system in under 2 seconds. The launch canister, still carrying one unfired 9M723 missile, detonated in the secondary explosion that followed. The warhead's explosive fill, 480 kilograms of high-explosive fragmentation material, added to the destruction in a radius that cleared every piece of equipment from the firing point clearing. The second and third impacts were secondary in importance but complete in their effect. The command vehicle, struck by the second HIMARS round, lost its roof section and all equipment above the vehicle floor. Russian crews operating in this area had learned, at enormous cost, that HIMARS strikes leave nothing repairable. The logistics vehicle was struck by shrapnel from the third round's impact at the access track entry point. It burned. If you believe it's tactics that win wars, not raw numbers, type East Alert in the comments. Because what Ukrainian planners did here is a textbook case of how a smaller force uses intelligence and precision to defeat a larger opponent's expensive assets. By 4:01 a.m., 14 minutes after the targeting solution was transmitted, the firing position north of Belgorod was a debris field. 3 vehicles, total. The command vehicle destroyed. The logistics truck destroyed. And the Iskander-M TEL, one of approximately 120 such systems Russia had deployed across the theater, reduced to burning wreckage with its missile and warhead adding to the devastation. 11 men had entered that firing position. Ukrainian sources, citing intercepted communications from the following morning, indicated that a rescue team dispatched from the nearest Russian logistics position encountered what first responders described as, quote, complete destruction of all personnel and equipment. The communication was transmitted in the clear. A sign, analysts noted, that the Russian unit's encryption equipment had been destroyed with everything else. Now consider the obstacle that nearly unraveled the entire operation at its most critical moment. At 3:44 a.m., 3 minutes before the targeting solution was ready to transmit, one of the 2 relay drones lost power. Battery drain, accelerated by cold air temperatures at altitude that night, had been running faster than pre-mission calculations suggested. The drone carrying the closest visual confirmation of the TL's erection status, the one whose camera feed was providing real-time confirmation that the target was at the right coordinates and in the right configuration, simply stopped transmitting 3 minutes before the shot. The Ukrainian forward controller had a decision to make in approximately 30 seconds: abort the strike and reset, potentially losing the targeting window entirely if the crew sensed something wrong and relocated. Proceed on the basis of the last confirmed position data, accepting that the TEL might have shifted slightly from the recorded coordinates. Or transmit the targeting solution using position data from the second relay drone, which was farther from the target but still had intermittent thermal contact. The controller chose to proceed. Using the last confirmed position data from the failed drone, cross-referenced against the approach track and the known dimensions of the firing position clearing. Data that had been modeled in advance using satellite imagery. The targeting solution was built to account for a potential position variance of up to 15 meters. The HIMARS round CEP. Circular error probable. The radius within which 50% of rounds will impact. For the M31 munition at that range is approximately 5 meters. 15-meter variance tolerance. 5-meter accuracy. The math worked. The strike proceeded. This is the kind of decision-making that Ukrainian military planners have developed over years of combat experience. The ability to make rapid, high-confidence calls under conditions of degraded information using pre-planned contingency logic rather than improvised guesswork. It is not luck. It is doctrine. And it is doctrine that Russia, operating with Soviet-era command culture, has consistently failed to match. What would NATO have done differently in this scenario? Was the decision to proceed with degraded ISR coverage the right call? Comment your analysis, because this exact decision point is being debated in military planning circles right now. The morning after the strike, Ukrainian General Staff released a formal statement confirming the destruction of a Russian Iskander-M TEL in the Belgorod region. The statement was precise. 1 transporter erector launcher destroyed, 1 9M723 missile destroyed, associated crew vehicles destroyed. It did not specify the full casualty count, though subsequent satellite imagery analysis conducted by multiple open-source intelligence organizations confirmed the total destruction of all 3 vehicles and no evidence of recovery operations within the first 24 hours, an indicator that there was nothing to recover. The Russian Ministry of Defense did not acknowledge the loss. This is standard. Russian military communications doctrine, inherited from Soviet information security practices and reinforced by the political constraints of a leadership that has built its narrative around inevitable military success, treats battlefield setbacks as state secrets. The families of the 11 men in that firing point were not notified through official channels that their husbands and sons had died, serving a launcher that Ukrainian intelligence operators had been tracking for 16 hours. They learned through the networks that Russian military families have built over the course of this war. Telegram channels, regional forums. The careful, coded language of people who know they cannot speak openly about military losses but must find ways to share the truth. Russian intercepted communications from the following 48 hours revealed something that Ukrainian intelligence assessed as operationally significant. Across at least 2 other Iskander-M units operating in the Belgorod region, there was a documented shift in operating patterns. Units that had been maintaining a standard cycle of movement and firing reduced their time at pre-prepared positions by approximately 60%. One intercepted communication, assessed as originating from a unit operations officer rather than a lower-ranking crew member, referenced the strike directly. They know where the positions are. We cannot use the prepared points. Every minute we're stationary is a minute they're watching. This is the intended effect of a precision strike on a high-value mobile system. The goal is not purely physical destruction of the targeted vehicle, though that is necessary. The goal is behavioral modification across the entire force. Make every crew operating a similar system doubt the safety of every prepared position. Force them into unplanned positions with lower accuracy, less reliable communications, more difficult logistics. Degrade not just the specific system you destroyed, but the effectiveness of every similar system that crew's colleagues operate for weeks afterward. Ukrainian planners call this the cascading effect. 1 strike. Multiplied impact. The Iskander-M TEL destroyed in this operation had, according to open-source tracking compiled from Ukrainian targeting reports and satellite imagery over the preceding months, been associated with strikes against at least 2 Ukrainian urban centers. The pattern of its deployments, reconstructed by Ukrainian intelligence analysts, suggested it had been a primary contributor to a strike package targeting infrastructure in the Kharkiv region. It would never fire another missile. Let me pause here on something that the casualty figures and equipment tallies can obscure. The 11 men in that firing position were not abstract units on a planning map. They were individuals, trained specialists, many of them who had spent months operating this equipment. The command vehicle likely contained a senior officer, given the Iskander's mission profile. The TEL crew were trained technical specialists, not ordinary infantry. Their deaths represent a training investment that Russia cannot replace quickly. Russia's ability to regenerate qualified Iskander-M crews was already under severe strain by the time of this operation. Casualty rates, the expansion of the launcher force to cover multiple axes of advance, and the difficulty of training replacements for specialized roles in a military education system that had been pulling instructors to fill frontline shortfalls. All of it had created a personnel crisis that the physical destruction of launchers only amplified. You lose the vehicle. You also lose the people who knew how to operate it. And in Russian military doctrine, those people are not quickly replaced. Now here's the question I want you to sit with before we reach the conclusion of this story. Was waiting for the erection sequence the right call? The Ukrainian commanders who designed this operation made a deliberate choice to let the crew raise the launch tube before striking. That decision meant there was a period of several minutes during which the Iskander-M TEL, had its crew been alerted or had their pre-fire checks revealed something suspicious, could have been made ready to fire. 19M 723 missile, launched before the HIMARS rounds arrived, could have carried 480 kilograms of explosive to a Ukrainian city. The waiting also meant the warhead was destroyed in the secondary explosion rather than potentially recovered if the strike had hit the TEL before the round was loaded into the tube. Was it the right trade-off? The operators who made this call are certain. The missile was destroyed. The crew was destroyed. The launcher was destroyed. The result was complete. But what would you have done? Is the certainty of total destruction worth the risk of giving a crew those extra minutes to complete their pre-fire cycle? Here's one more piece of analysis before the conclusion, something that rarely makes it into the standard reporting on operations like this one. Destroying a single Iskander-M TEL is significant. But its significance compounds when you consider the broader context of Russian missile force management. Russia began this war with approximately 120 operational Iskander-M TELs across all formations. Through a combination of combat losses, manufacturing limitations under sanction pressure, and the accelerated consumption of both vehicles and crews at a pace Soviet-era planning never anticipated, that number has declined materially over the course of the war. Each launcher destroyed represents not just a loss from current inventory, but a loss from an inventory that cannot be fully replenished at the rate required to maintain pre-war employment doctrine. The industrial reality is stark. The Iskander-M TEL is manufactured at the Votkinsk machine building plant in the Udmurt Republic. That facility, under pre-war operating conditions, produced approximately 10 to 15 TEL systems per year. Under sanctions and with Western component restrictions limiting access to guidance system, electronics, and precision manufacturing equipment, that rate has declined. Meanwhile, combat losses have accumulated faster than production can compensate. Ukraine's strategy of targeting Iskander-M systems and the intelligence architecture that enables those targeting operations is not just about preventing individual missile strikes. It is about accelerating the attrition of an asset class that Russia cannot easily replace, forcing operational changes that degrade the effectiveness of remaining systems, and demonstrating to Russian military planners that mobility alone is insufficient protection against a sufficiently sophisticated ISR-to-strike integration. Micro-final incoming. Because what Russian planners did in response to this strike, and what Ukrainian intelligence discovered they did, is one of the most tactically revealing episodes of the entire campaign. 48 hours after the strike, satellite imagery and signals intelligence indicated that the surviving Iskander-M units in the Belgorod region had stopped using pre-prepared firing positions entirely. Instead, they shifted to improvised firing points, locations selected from maps or aerial imagery rather than through engineering preparation, no pre-surveyed coordinates, no cleared sightlines, no hardened access roads. That decision degraded their accuracy. An Iskander-M fired from an improvised position, without the survey data that links the launcher's GPS position to precise target coordinates, introduces error into the targeting solution. The system's CEP, already a matter of meters from a prepared position, grows meaningfully from an unsurveyed location. The missiles still fly. They still arrive in the general target area. But the precision that makes the Iskander-M a true precision strike weapon rather than a powerful but imprecise area weapon depends on position survey data that improvised sites cannot provide. Ukrainian cities that had been targeted by this particular unit's pre-planned strike packages experienced a measurable reduction in precision strike events in the weeks following the operation. The force that remained was operating at degraded effectiveness, from positions that were harder to sustain logistically, under commanders who had been ordered to reduce their time at any firing point regardless of operational impact. 1 HIMARS strike, 16 hours of intelligence preparation, 4 M31 rockets, and a Russian missile force in one regional sector degraded not just by the loss of a launcher, but by the behavioral cascade that loss created. Real tactics. Real consequences. East alert. Let's assess the total picture. Ukrainian forces in this operation destroyed 1 Iskander-M TEL, assessed replacement cost approximately $100 million, destroyed 1 9M723 ballistic missile with its 480-kilogram warhead, assessed cost approximately $3 million per round in recent production estimates, destroyed the command vehicle and logistics support vehicle, assessed combined value approximately $2 million, neutralized 11 personnel, including assessed specialist crew members whose training cost represents years of investment in Russian missile force readiness. Total hardware value destroyed, approximately $105 million. Cost of the Ukrainian strike, 4 M31 GMLRS rockets, assessed at approximately $170,000 each, for a total munitions cost of approximately $680,000, plus the operational overhead of the surveillance drones, ISR integration, and coordination time. Call it a generous total of $2 million in total operational cost. The return on that investment is 52-to-1 in hardware terms alone. And that calculation does not include the cascading behavioral degradation across the surviving Russian missile force in the region, which is operationally valuable in ways that no dollar figure can fully capture. This is the arithmetic of modern precision warfare when one side has mastered ISR-to-strike integration and the other is still operating on doctrine designed for a battlefield that no longer exists. What's next for both sides? Russia's response to the loss of mobile launcher systems has followed a predictable pattern across this conflict. In the immediate aftermath, operational tempo with remaining systems decreases as commanders institute additional precautionary measures. New routing protocols, shortened dwell times, increased use of electronic countermeasures near launcher operations. These measures reduce operational effectiveness while improving survivability, a trade-off that favors Ukrainian defensive interests. Over a longer period, Russia has attempted to compensate for Iskander-M losses through increased use of longer-range systems operated from deeper in Russian territory. Kinzhal hypersonic missiles launched from MiG-31K aircraft, Kaliber cruise missiles launched from Caspian Sea and Black Sea platforms, and the increased integration of Iranian-supplied Shahed 136 loitering munitions as a cost-effective supplement to precision ballistic missile strikes. Each of these substitutions has its own vulnerabilities. Ukrainian air defense, using Western-supplied Patriot PAX-3 systems in combination with NASAMS and IRIS-T, has demonstrated meaningful effectiveness against multiple Russian strike system types. The Shahed 136 drones, while arriving in swarm packages that challenge intercept resources, are slow enough that Ukrainian air defense crews have developed effective countermeasures ranging from dedicated intercept aircraft to electronic jamming and FPV counter-drone tactics. The strategic picture that emerges from this operation and its context is one of a Ukrainian military that has mastered the cycle of collection, analysis, targeting, and strike at a tempo that consistently outpaces Russian adaptation. The Iskander-M crew that drove into firing position 2 north of Belgorod that night was operating under a set of assumptions about the safety of prepared positions, about Russian air superiority over the Belgorod region, about the limited reach of Ukrainian precision systems that the preceding years of combat had already invalidated. They drove into a firing point that Ukrainian operators had identified 6 weeks earlier. They raised their launch tube under drone surveillance. They died at 3:53 a.m. The wreckage burned through the morning hours. By the time the sun was fully up, the secondary explosions had finished. The tree cover that the engineers had selected to provide camouflage was burning in sections. Satellite imagery captured what ground observers could not safely approach. A firing point designed to serve as a launch pad for Russian strategic strikes on Ukraine, converted in 14 minutes into a debris field by precision intelligence-driven warfare. Before I give you the answers and the final assessment, here is a question for the comments that I genuinely want to know your take on. Do you think this kind of patient ambush operation, letting a target settle into its most vulnerable position before striking, represents the future of high-value target interdiction? Or does the risk of a launched missile in those final minutes before impact make it an unacceptable gamble? Drop your answer below. The most detailed analysis gets featured. Will Russia find a countermeasure to this kind of ISR-to-strike integration before Ukraine exhausts the Russian Iskander-M inventory entirely? Comment why yes or no. Because the answer to that question determines whether the next phase of this war looks like this operation or whether Russia adapts fast enough to make these strikes harder. Now, the answers you've been waiting for. The question from earlier, how many vehicles did Ukraine destroy in this strike? The answer is C. All vehicles, including the warheads, were destroyed. 3 vehicles entered the firing position: the Iskander-M TEL, the command vehicle, and the logistics support truck. All 3 were destroyed in the 4-round HIMARS strike. Additionally, the unfired 9M723 missile in the TEL's launch canister detonated in the secondary explosion, destroying the warhead as well. Total destruction of the convoy. Nothing was recovered. Which weapon was most decisive? This is the question that generates the most debate among tacticians analyzing this operation. The HIMARS was the terminal strike instrument. But without the surveillance drones maintaining tracking through the tree cover, the targeting solution could not have been built with sufficient accuracy. And without the 16-hour intelligence operation that identified the firing position in advance, the drones would have had nothing to track. The correct answer is C, the intelligence network. Every other capability in this chain depended on the foundational intelligence work that identified where the convoy was going before it arrived. Now the 3 questions that should be driving discussion in the comments. Was waiting for the erection sequence the right decision? The commanders chose to accept a window of risk, several minutes during which a crew that detected something wrong could potentially have launched, in exchange for the certainty of destroying the missile along with the launcher. The result validated the decision. But one communication intercept, one crew member with a bad feeling and a fast hand on the authorization control could have changed the outcome entirely. Is the complete destruction worth the gamble? Could Russia have prevented this? Operationally, yes, but only by abandoning the pre-prepared position doctrine entirely. The positions themselves were the vulnerability. The engineering preparation that made them tactically advantageous also made them identifiable through persistent surveillance. A Russian missile force that never uses prepared positions, fires less accurately, and faces harder logistics. But it is a force that is harder to ambush. Whether Russia's command culture can make that kind of fundamental doctrine revision quickly, under operational pressure, against an enemy that has demonstrated it will exploit any predictable pattern, is the central question of the next phase of this conflict. What would you have done differently as the Ukrainian forward controller at 3:44 a.m. with a dead drone and a 3-minute decision window? There are at least 3 legitimate options: abort and reset, proceed on degraded data, or request a repositioning pass from the surviving relay drone that might have cost the targeting window entirely. The controller chose to proceed. The math worked. But the decision was made on experience, training, and the kind of combat intuition that only comes from months of executing operations exactly like this one. What choice would you have made? Subscribe to East Alert, because we break down the battles that textbooks will study for decades. If you watch one more video tonight, make it the one on how Ukraine's GUR built the intelligence network that makes operations like this possible. The link is in the description. The firing position north of Belgorod is quiet now. The fires burned out by mid-morning. Forensic teams in the weeks that followed documented the debris field, the scattered components of a $100 million weapons system, the remains of a launch canister designed to deliver destruction across hundreds of kilometers, silent in the pine forest. Russia built the Iskander-M to be mobile, survivable, and lethal. Ukraine built the intelligence architecture to find it, track it, and destroy it at its most vulnerable moment. One side came prepared. The other came to a pre-planned firing point that had been under surveillance for 6 weeks. Stay vigilant.